Thanks for joining me for a Kick Up the Arts. I am Nicola Meehan, and if you're a fan of Dundee burger impresario Bob Servant, or Leith-set sibling thriller Guilt, or true life Brinks-Mat heist drama The Gold, you are in for a treat. Yes, that is my dog in the background. My guest on this episode is screenwriter and author Neil Forsyth, who created all of those titles and so much more. The Broughty Ferry native has just launched a brilliant new series, Legends, which stars Steve Coogan and Tom Burke. And it's based on an early 90s operation where a gang of civil servants went deep undercover in a bid to win, casually, the war on drugs. We talked about legends and truth and fiction, and Brian Cox's role as Bob's servant, and Neil also gave us an imaginary evening of entertainment round at his place, Midori in hand, I have no doubt, as he discussed his choice of a favourite Scottish album, film and book. Spoiler alert, they were Deacon Blue's Rain Town, Irvin Welsh's Train Spotting in all of its guises, including the Danny Boyle film adaptation, and John Niven's blindsiding memoir, Oh Brother, which is about the loss of his younger brother, who took his own life when he was 42. Neil and I met over a pot of coffee in a very fancy hotel suite in Glasgow, which brought back classy memories, it transpired, for both of us.
So we're in Blythswood Square.
Yeah.
You can see a tree literally out of this window, and that tree is where I spent most of my teenage evenings when I came through to go to gigs at King Tut's.
Yeah.
Because we were underage, so we would get a carry out first, and we would sit in that tree and sing songs.
Oh, and you weren't moved on by the police?
Apparently not. So yes, this is a little bit more of a gentrified view I'm getting
Yeah,
today.
it's very nice. The last time I stayed in here was I used to stay here with Brian Cox when we did Bob's Servant. I think the only reason I got to stay here is because Brian wanted to stay here, and they thought if I stayed here as well, then we could make sure he was in the car in the morning.
No, that's right.
At the right time. But I've still got memories of sitting down in that breakfast with a text from the production saying, "Are you guys in the car?" as a full English breakfast got put down in front of Brian.
Yeah, how will I play this?
Yeah, exactly.
When you got into this business, did you realise diplomacy was going to have to be like a key facet of your role? Right?
Very much,
right.
quite quickly learned that.
I actually interviewed Brian Cox. It might have even been last week, and we were, of course, mainly talking about his new film, but I was telling him that my dad's a Lochee boy, or lives in Lochee now, and of course we got talking about Dundee, and it's wonderful because he's done so much, but he's never presumptuous. So he said, well, I did this series called Bob's Servant, in this lovely way, not patronising me, but in case I might not have known about it. And, his whole demeanour changed when he started speaking about it. He spoke about it with such absolute fondness and humour. And I think it's wonderful how he just completely and utterly embodied that role. But it really embodied the Dundonian in him in many ways, didn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And I had lunch with Brian recently, and it's the first thing he talks about, when we have lunch. And a couple of years ago, we did a little one-off Radio 4 thing with Brian and Lulu.
That's right.
Bob's Servant Says Cheerio, which was I absolutely loved it. It was just such a laugh. But yeah, I've got such very fond memories of it. But in this hotel, and at night, Brian and I would sit and have dinner, and have maybe a glass of wine, and kind of knackered from the day, and it was sort of always a bit hysterical. And he would just tell me these largely gravitate towards telling stories about Dundee. It was great, magical time.
It's also just that thing. I think you need to be back in a place to sort of remember. Like I'd forgotten about the tree.
Yeah,
and then I was like, God, wait a minute, that's right. And we were very civilised. We got vodka. We would get vodka, but we would get it in like Burger King cup. We put it in Burger King cups.
Touch
and
of
we
class.
would have a spicy bean burger with it. So that was it.
Well, we should get a few cans and head out there later.
Absolutely. Let's just do that. In fact, there's no time like the present, Neil, apart from the fact we've got a wonderful new series to talk about and some other things. Do you know, I got a Facebook memory this very day. I don't know if you got it. You're not on Facebook. You're a much cooler person than me. It's 3 years to the day since our BBC Radio Scotland For the Record feature went out.
Yeah, I love that. I love that interview.
Yeah, I thought that's absolutely lovely. And of course, as part of that, you spoke about some of the songs that had soundtracked your life. Yep. Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine featured to my utter delight, as did a band that we're going to talk about shortly, because in this interview we'll talk about your work obviously, and we'll have a sort of imaginary evening or afternoon round at yours, so you can choose us a Scottish album to play us, a Scottish film to show us, and then we'll chat about a Scottish book that you would give us for some bedtime reading, a sublime book and a devastating one as well, but we'll come to that. However, on my way through, and yesterday I got to watch Legends.
Oh, great.
And can I say, not only do I love it, I love the fact that you're now, Neil, giving the Pet Shop Boys a run for their money with your one-word titles, right? We had The Gold, we had Guilt, and now we've got Legends. It's all there, isn't it? It's all you need.
That's it. Yeah, it was, well, you know, Legends is, I didn't know this term, but if someone goes undercover, it's called their legend, their undercover identity, and going undercover, you're playing your legend. And the minute I heard that, I thought, well, that's the title.
Yeah, totally.
And it's, very pleased with it.
When did you first encounter this particular story? I started thinking I probably, you know, we kind of recognised the landscape and the kind of memories maybe of some of the headlines at the time in this war on drugs. But when did you encounter this particular aspect of it, and even just encounter this terminology of the legends?
Well, if we did our Radio Scotland interview 3 years ago, it would have been almost around then, because I think it was almost 3 years ago, early summer. I heard about Guy's story. So one of the legends, Guy Stanton, who Tom Burke plays, I heard about his story, and I went to meet him for lunch, and I wasn't sure about it. I didn't necessarily want to do another kind of multi-strand crime drama set in the early 90s, seeing as I was halfway through making one.
That is a theme.
But I just had lunch with him, and it was just remarkable. He was just telling these incredible stories about things he'd done in his life. And then he introduced me to some of the other legends, and drove around meeting them and going to their house and kind of winning their trust a little bit and hearing the stories, and it was just brilliant. I mean, it's just a great story. You
can maybe tell us a little bit more about the story, because again, it's got one of these wonderful sort of notions that truth is so often absolutely wilder and almost more overwritten than fiction could ever be, can't it? Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And truth is unbelievable. That's what you find as a dramatist, really. Well, basically, in a nutshell, it's a group of... In 1990, during the war on drugs, the DEA in America had a kind of $1 billion budget, hundreds of agents that they would train for years and years and years and send them undercover to try and take down the Central American cartels. And in Britain, which was also facing this influx of heroin and real social devastation as a result, Her Majesty's Customs, who were in charge of the borders for kind of almost strange historical reasons, decided that they would try and do the same, but with almost no resources. So they took a bunch of fairly normal customs officers who were doing boring work in different areas of customs, giving them minimal training, and sent them undercover into the drugs world.
And then they were called. The other thing is as well, it's like, it's the real life aspect, and it's the fact that it was quote unquote ordinary people doing. Yeah. But actually, they're extraordinary people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're just, you know, like a lot of people. What I think is really interesting is they were all sort of late 20s, early 30s, which for me now you think, well, that's pretty young, but it's not that young. And I think it's not that young in terms of building a life, and it's not that young in terms of 1990, pre-internet. Less social mobility, less fluidity of employment, and they had safe, secure civil service jobs that they were never going to give up. They're almost all from working class backgrounds. They didn't have a safety net, so they were trapped. They were trapped doing boring work. They could see what their lives would be. They didn't like how that looked, and they got given this opportunity that was really a kind of pact with the devil. We can give you excitement. We can give you as much adrenaline as you want. You can give you a chance to make this incredible impact and do something really worthy, but along the way, your life's in danger.
Yeah, quite. There are these posters, and I just love, I think it's, they say, could you offer more? Yeah. That's a fascinating, just even 4 words, because it's a prospect, but it's a predicament as well, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Because it's also, could you be offered more?
Yes,
What's happening in your life?
Yeah, and the percentage of people at that age that think they could offer more than they have is very, very high.
Yeah.
And it was extraordinary, and just they probably kind of went there, and took on such incredible risks. It was astonishing.
Yeah. There's also that thing again, which I think resonates through so much of your work, which is there's this kind of shady or undulating moral terrain, isn't there? Like, who's good, who's bad? Not all heroes wear capes. Not all heroes are necessarily good or bad either.
Yeah, and the grey, basically. Looking at that
totally.
Kind of the moral grey, which was a big thing in Guilt, definitely. But you just want nuanced characters. You don't want them to be archetypal goodies or baddies. And you just want them all to be capable of surprise, and often that's capable of surprise by their moral decisions, conflicting to maybe the impression you initially had of them. So that's where all the kind of good stuff is dramatically, really.
Totally, yeah. I think also the kind of visually it's really striking, and it is so embedded. I mean, I just remember like every bit of the fashion I'm seeing. It's not overtly a period drama. It horrifies me to even call it that when it's the 90s, Neil, because as far as I'm concerned, that's contemporaneous. But the soundtrack really, really just whisks you back, doesn't it? Like in all of your work, music has been it's like a portal, isn't it? So were you listening to that kind of music? Were you going back there yourself when you were writing it to get in the zone?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Making up a playlist and it just puts you. I think it helps you catch the spirit of the age. Definitely.
Yeah, totally.
And it was an interesting time, that early 90s. Musically, things were just darkening slightly. It was going from very poppy into just something a bit darker and more nuanced. And I don't think it's only coincidence that the economy was starting to crumble a little bit. So these things always tend to tie in with each other. But yeah, getting the right track for something, God, it's an exhaustive process. But if you feel you nailed it, it's really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, because it speaks to everyone and it takes everyone back there, sets the scene. So musically, I mean, what a soundtrack you would have anyway. But if we were going round to yours and it was a Scottish album, we're going back, as we so often do with your work and our conversations, to Dundee, or rather to Broughty Ferry, right? Yeah. Tell us what the album is and the band is, because it's a Broughty Ferry boy. Another one that you've chosen?
It's Deacon Blues Rain Town. There's definitely a huge sort of personal link to it all. I mean, when I grew up in Dundee, and I had the stirrings of hoping I could maybe one do something creatively, and I loved writing at school, and I didn't love much else at school and everything else, And I wrote for United fanzines and things like this. But it still felt so utterly impossible, the idea of achieving that. And that's a very common thing for people that grow up, I'm sure you'd agree, in sort of provincial towns and cities.
Totally.
But there was these little glimmers in the Dundee Courier. So the Dundee Courier back then was still the small ads on the front page.
Brilliant.
So, the Titanic could go down and people were still selling sewing machines on the front cover of the Dundee Courier. But, within that there was a sort of the local news, round the courts, and I should say that the Dundee Courier round the court section has been a huge influence on my career. But beyond that, there was a kind of cultural page. And in the cultural page, there would just be often little glimmers of Brian Cox and Ricky Ross.
Wow.
So it was Brian, it was like, that guy grew up in Brian Constable Street, up near Stobbsmuir, and he's in Hollywood doing these parts, so he's winning Olivia and everything else. And then there was Ricky. But then the thing with Ricky was that my granny, Kathy Walker, lived in the same block of flats in Broughty Ferry as Ricky's mum.
Oh, no way.
So they were friends, yeah.
Right, okay.
And, but I still remember when I was I must have been about 12, 13 maybe, of my granny being at the kitchen and saying, there's Ricky down there. And me jumping up in the chair.
No way,
and I saw
really?
Ricky and Lorraine going off in this car.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, what a life that is.
Yeah,
you get to drive a nice car off with Lorraine.
I know, exactly.
So, and it was bizarre, and then I remember they dropped a signed photo in, I think, that came back to me through my granny and everything. So anyway, it just felt so wild that this and Ricky went to the same school as me, and he grew up in Fairfield Road, just up the road from me, in Ellisy Road and things. So it felt incredible that this guy from Dundee had not only formed a great band, and had the success. And then Raintown I bought from Groucho's. I'd have bought that a couple of years after its release, probably.
Okay.
But and I just remember loving the album, but everything about it for me, the fact that it was this guy that I could sort of pretend to people at school I knew, and then the album itself, I just thought, because even the Glasgow of it's interesting, because it's obviously a very Glasgow album, but Glasgow was, again, in a provincial city, Glasgow was kind of impossibly glamorous.
Yes.
At that age. Same with Edinburgh, same with anywhere that it was sort of bigger and more challenging, I suppose. And so, moving from Dundee to Glasgow back in those days and pre-internet, it was like emigration.
No, completely. You're right. It was almost exotic, wasn't it? There was a glamour there. You're so right. And so many bands were coming out of it at that point.
Yes, exactly.
Every week on Top of the Pops, it was these Glasgow bands.
Absolutely.
But I'm like you. For me, it was Deacon Blue, who particularly struck a chord, that record. And I mean, even visually, even the visual aesthetic of the album, even that Oscar Marzaroli photograph.
Beautiful,
I mean, like the atmosphere. And it's fascinating because in one way it is a really atmospheric album. The feel of it, the way Born in a Storm comes in and it's about the elements and that hurricane day. But in another way, it is so riled up. And it is so fired up by politics. And when I was watching Legends, I was like, there is something in Raintown, because it does have this reflection of Thatcherite Britain, ragman, riches, loaded, and that very, very much starts striking a chord as soon as we're in the door with Legends, doesn't it? It's that kind of time. It's slightly later, but not by much. Yeah,
I think it was the kind of cold reality of the 80s exuberance, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think that was... and a kind of knowingness to how preposterous a lot of the kind of the 80s themes were. And, those 80s themes, a lot of which I kind of captured or included in the Gold, certainly the first series. The big thing for me with the 80s was this Thatcherite idea of social mobility that was a complete fallacy.
Yes.
And it was a self-serving political suggestion to extract votes from people who would be voting against their own interests, basically. And I think that what you then found in the late 80s, early 90s was this almost a slight "I told you so" from certain elements in terms of they saw through these things from the start, and there was a realism to the early 90s that I think definitely albums like Raintown and the smartness of the writing would feed into.
And also I think the other thing is to have all of that, to have the atmosphere, to have the political kind of like insight, if you like, and rage, and also to have such sing-along songs, right? I don't know how often you listen to that record now.
I listened to it on the plane up this morning.
Really? Did you? I love it.
Yeah, but I saw them, last year, I think, in Wembley Arena. And I saw them a couple of years ago in Royal Albert Hall, and I still think, God, that's... that guy's from Fairfield Road.
Yes,
and even knowing Ricky a bit now, thankfully, he's a pal of mine, and Seamus and Lorraine and things. It's still thrilling when you watch a Dundonian. For me, it's like remember you see someone from Dundee on TV and you couldn't believe it.
Completely. I mean, that was it, because I grew up in Stirling, but my dad was always in Dundee, so I was up there every second weekend all my life. So it's kind of always felt like half Dundonian because of that. Yeah. So even you saying about buying Raintown from Groucho's, and I'm thinking, where was Groucho's at that point? Was that where it was next to the Thistle Hotel? Because it moved around. The Overgate. Yeah, totally.
Next to the Thistle Hotel. The low roof. Low roof, the great smell as you went in.
I know.
Breeks Broughty behind the counter, and the funny guys, the guys that ran it were so funny. I remember on their website for years they had a selection of the funny exchanges they'd had with people.
Oh, I remember that. That's absolutely right. I mean, even to have that, the kind of humour there. But I think it was years before I discovered that Ricky had been from Dundee. I just knew they were a Glasgow band, and coming from Stirling, exactly what you're saying. That seemed miraculous. It genuinely blew my mind. Yeah,
well, I wouldn't speak for Ricky, but I think he probably had that younger thing of Glasgow being quite exotic and exciting.
Yeah.
But I think, like a lot of people, as he's got older, he's become almost more Dundonian again.
Yeah.
Always at Tannadice and things like that, and I think that it is a Glasgow. It's interesting because yes, it is a Glasgow album in lots of ways, conceptually, I think in particular. But Dignity, even though the inspiration might have come on a Glasgow street and everything else, there's something about the writing of Dignity that the writing of it feels very Dundonian to me.
Yes.
He packs his lunch in a sun-blessed bag. I mean, that is like a Micomara line.
It is. It absolutely is. You're so right there.
He talks about collecting the coupons that come with the soup. It's the same. It's the same world. So there is the. Yes, it's social commentary, but there's humour in Dignity that I think you often don't hear when it's the sing-along version, but when you kind of dig into it.
Yeah.
So I think we can put a fairly sizable Dundonian claim on it.
Absolutely. I'm calling it. I mean, I've spoken to Ricky and Lorraine and the band, I don't know how many times over the years specifically about Dignity. I've written liner notes for them, and I've spoken to Ricky at length about that idea of actually being able to encapsulate something perhaps more when you're not there. So he actually wrote Dignity. He told me one time he still had some jotters from when he had been a school teacher and he was abroad. I think he was on holiday in Greece, and that distance allowed him to write songs almost about home.
Yes.
And I tell this story all the time, but when I was still living in London and working in the music industry, and I was always homesick, and the reason I was asking you how often you listen to Raintown is I couldn't listen to it in London. It made me too homesick.
Yeah.
And I remember getting in a taxi one day, years and years after, and I was done in anyway, but Rain Time came on, the song. I guess the guy was going to be playing the whole album. And I was like, do you know what? Bugger it. I'm going home.
You know what you're like. You're like that guy in that beer advert from
the Frankie Miller. I've literally got it here. The Frankie Miller Caledonia.
Yeah.
That was my Frankie. That was my Caledonia moment. Yeah. Lured by Tennant's Lager and Deacon Blue. So much to answer for.
But I always think there's a slight the narrative of that advert. I always find quite confusing.
I didn't have a briefcase.
He's got a very successful job.
I know.
He bins the job, ends up in Edinburgh, I think, from memory, and he ends up buying a round for an entire pub.
I know. Hooray! I'm unemployed. I'm back.
Unemployed and I'm skint.
Totally.
Yeah.
I know. But it did have that, and I wondered about you writing someone like Bob Servant, if you like, a character who's so beautifully embedded in people and places that we know, Dundee and Broughty Ferry. When you're not there, or even maybe writing about the Edinburgh and the Leith, obviously you lived there as a student, when you're not there, does that distance help you almost focus on it a little bit more than being on the ground?
Yeah, I think so. You kind of feel, I think you just feel there's nostalgia, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's a sort of almost weird heightened love of the expat of your home country.
Totally.
Where I absolutely love Dundee. I love being a Dundonian, and I love going back. I get so excited, I take I take my son up now to watch United a few times a year. I go with him and my dad, and then we play golf at St Andrews and things like that, and it's just brilliant, So I think that voice and that mentality, but I think the East Coast Scots voice is artistic voice is always a little touch of the absurdity and the humour to it, and it's got this weird, deep-rooted thing, which I think you could argue back to McGonagall, and certainly, things like Michael Mara, and I do think some of Ricky's writing and some of the East Coast, and then I think same with Irvin. I just think the East Coast,
absolutely.
I just think the East Coast has that slightly different strain of humour. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's just a slightly more absurdist, I think.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's move to the East Coast a little bit then, and you can wheel through. Speaking of Dundee, so I would go up to see my dad's, and he had, by the way, this was in the late 80s, he had a VHS. We didn't have a video player at home at my mum's, and it was like a tiny telly, and it was on like a little trolley, and the VHS, so we would get to wheel it through to our bedroom, and watch a video. So whenever I ask someone this question when we do this as part of the series, I always envisage the VHS getting wheeled through. So let's say you're wheeling us through a VHS and you're going to put on a film, and yes, it is based on a book by Irvin Welsh, so we can touch on the writing first. I mean, the way in which the Glasgow of Raintown, the Edinburgh of Trainspotting, they are so utterly identifiable, but they're so utterly unique, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the reasons I put Trainspotting in, I love the film very, very much, but equally it was a way to cheat and be able to talk about two books.
See, I saw through it immediately.
Yeah, I think you did.
I got your number, Neil Forsyth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very, very predictable. It's like, fuck, how do I do Niven and Irvin? So, Trainspotting, it just hit me like a kind of, it was like
a train.
It was unbelievable, like so many of us, I'm sure. Just that thing of and also a kind of very formative part in my life. So I think I checked this morning, I think the book was 93 and the film was 96, So I was 15 and 18, By the book, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the kind of the myth of it all. I remember 95, very early internet, but not really internet, and Irvin became this mythical figure.
Totally. Yes.
I remember going through after Trainspotting was coming out and going through to the Bells in Edinburgh at Hogmanay, and people saying, "Oh, Irvin Welsh is having a party at the Balmoral," and he's taking the whole floor out. And I bet it was bollocks. Probably Irvin that started the story. But I was like, I remember thinking,
it was probably Irvin that told you the story.
Yeah, exactly. And I was looking up at the Balmoral. God, imagine that! Imagine being up there and But the book was just. I just remember reading it and thinking, what the fuck is this? It was just this onslaught of voice and the boldness of it and the confidence of it. And I read everything I could about it, and the fact that Irvin was a civil servant, he worked for the council when he first started writing it. And I think the first draft was something like 200,000 words, and it was just boxes and boxes of notes, and he had to hack at it to make it make sense, and all the little vignettes in it. It was just incredible, And then the film which I think I watched at the Seagate in Dundee at the cinema there.
Oh, nice.
I just remember being so just absolutely loving it, and also what I think I really enjoyed, having these kind of very embryonic thoughts about being a writer or being involved with the creative process, was seeing, oh, that's how they did that, that's how they adapted it.
I wondered about this.
And I mean, they adapted it fantastically well, because it was just, I mean, it's a by design a very sprawling book. It's all tangents and vignettes and things like this, which are brilliant in a book, but adaptation very difficult, because it's like, well, what is our central story here? And what they did do was they didn't take the easy route of saying, oh, it's really about mood and vibes and atmosphere. It's about telling a story. That's what it's about. And that's where a lot of things fall apart, and that's where a lot of television falls apart, where it's like, oh, it's just it's an incredibly dark piece of work and all this stuff. You've got to have within that a good, solid story. And with the film of Trainspotting, and I watched it again recently, it just holds up so brilliantly. It just sweeps you along. Yeah. And they still find the moments for the vignettes. They still got time for Sick Boy to debate James Bonds and things like that. But these little meanders are so justified in terms of building character and who these people are and the relationships they are, and showing the depth and nuance of the relationship, so then you understand it more when they have to make decisions. And it's just a great piece of work, and the energy of it.
Oh, completely. It is. It's an absolute thrill. I find that fascinating, what you're saying about it's such a magical act, never mind a balancing act, of keeping your eye on the story, and also honing these characters so they are utterly identifiable and completely rounded, complex. Everyone has so many moral grey areas, as you said earlier, but also relaying an existing tale. So in Legends, for example, how did you go about, I don't know how many people you spoke to, I don't know how many sources there were. Are the people that we meet on screen kind of distillations of various aspects of the research you did and the people you spoke to?
Yeah, I mean, yes, well, Guy's very much Guy. And actually the others, the thing that I get a bit pissed off with is this idea with my shows that people sometimes, as a shorthand, say, oh, they're kind of fictional characters. You're like, no, they're not. No. Nobody's fictional. They're composites. It's just so different. They're composite characters based on extensive research. And the reason they're composites are, there's a multitude of reasons, but often it is for legal reasons, particularly Legends, actually, because none of them want their names used.
I wondered, right.
No, they didn't want their names used.
Guy's out there, but beyond that.
Well, that's not his surname. We don't use his real surname, and we never give any identifying factors.
The fact that he is called Guy, though, I love. It's just so brilliantly perfect, isn't it? Any guy.
It's like
just
a Martin Amis bit of character naming.
Beautiful.
But but the others, they're composite characters. Some of them are based kind of on one, maybe two people, where some of them are based on a few. So there's that. There's the kind of legal side, but equally it's just building a clean narrative. I can't have endless cast, or the whole thing becomes so cluttered. So you have to be concise, and it's how do you kind of concertina in the story and make it kind of logical, clean, still a busy ensemble show, but pragmatic. You're not putting too many people on the screen, and you're not asking the viewer to invest in too many people. But they're all very, very educated. I mean, put it this way, I phone around the legends, the real life legends, I say, like, you'll all know the character that you've influenced.
Oh, brilliant. You've
influenced, and they absolutely will.
That's going to be incredible. I just love the fact of seeing different versions of yourself being reflected back.
Well, the real life guy and his wife watched the series.
Right.
And they very happy and enjoyed it, and then they watched it a second time and they loved it, because he said the first time he was just nervous.
But
they're here very happy with it, and that's the biggest compliment you can get, really.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, I can't wait to watch it again, if you like, because as with so many of your kind of series, there are so many details. I mean, I know that I don't want to give anything away. I'm terrified about saying too much other than that it is wonderful, but fashion plays a part. Rare football tops play a part in most of your series as well. So do you still have fun with details like that? Because I love that we can get completely embedded in the story you're telling, but there are these lovely little resonances. They all echo within each other. And again, someone like Irvin Welsh does that within his books as well.
Yeah, Irvin's always got people in his books who are the horrific culprits of terrible crimes, and they're always named after Hearts players. The football tops is actually just a really nice way to quickly buy period. It's really,
totally.
It's a really smart way to do it. So I think we've got a Germany top in this and a Liverpool top, and it's a little shorthand. People don't really. I think a lot of people don't realise how much it's sunk into them certain iconic football tops.
Yeah.
So it's a nice quick way to establish period.
Totally. These are such fascinating, very, very particular tales, if you like. The heist in the gold, and of course this unbelievable unfolding of the legends going into the war on drugs, if you like, in a place and time. But there does seem to be this endless curiosity or fascination you have with sort of people not being what they say or claim they are, or who they are. You know, even going back to Bob Servant and the kind of internet scammers, you know, and we see that across the way. So although it's a very specific story, it does seem that that's a sort of constant source of curiosity for you.
I think that's true. I mean, I think in a generic sense, that's the case with most people. But also in a more kind of general sense, you want your characters to be interesting and capable of surprise, and to achieve that, then how we meet them needs to be upended in some way dramatically as you go.
Totally.
But I think for me, look, I suppose for a lot of people, life is a sort of life is a lifelong journey to try and working out who you are, really.
Yes.
And that's probably been part of my life without doubt. I've definitely had very diverse stages of my life, if you like, and some happier than others, and. I think that's probably true. But equally now, I'm 48, I probably feel much more comfortable in my own skin than ever. So hopefully, maybe that means that I start writing about more emotionally balanced people.
There's a line very early on in the first episode. I'm not going to say who says it. I don't want to say too much. But all it is you need a plan, a persona, and you need to believe in them both. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that's pretty much applicable to all of us, is it not? Right?
Absolutely. And if you don't believe it, pretend you believe it for as long as you can.
Yeah, totally. There's also the idea of community that seems to be very much embedded in this as well, you know, and what the brilliant thing about that is that, again, we see all the different facets of how a community works within the prism of the particular story you're telling. That's just such fertile ground, isn't it? Yeah,
I think what you need to do is find worlds that feel clearly defined and unique within your overall dramatic balance. So, you know, we've got the Turkish community in North London. You know, I did a lot of research into that, and the kind of Liverpool community, and it's finding a way to make those worlds feel different. Now, that's not just my job, that's the direction and the design. Casting's a big one. You know, working really hard to try and get authentic accents in there.
Totally,
but it's definitely. When I researched it, I think, God, that, particularly like, say, the North London Turkish community, I find that fascinating. I knew nothing about that. So I need to try and replicate on the screen the interest and intrigue I felt when I first discovered that world existed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you mentioned Irvine Welsh, and of course the incredible film version of Trainspotting as well, that adaptation. But you said that was a little bit of a cheat because you wanted to get Irvine Welsh and John Niven in there. I had a lovely evening with them in London for the podcast together. We recorded an event in
dangerous
it was, you know, they were probably better behaved than me, to be perfectly frank. But there is something lovely about the way in which both Irvine and John write, like, so beautifully. Such really, really interesting, I think, studies into all sorts of different facets of masculinity as well, but always to this incredible soundtrack. You know, John Niven, of course, had worked in the music industry first as well. I know your paths have crossed, and wrote about, you know, I love music from Big Pink. I love his music writing, and of course now we have this incredible. You can tell us about the book you've chosen. But when did you first kind of encounter his writing?
Well, Kill Your Friends, I remember hearing about it. I've got a lot of friends who were musicians at the time, and I remember it being sort of talked about. I really enjoyed it. I think my friend Gordon Smartmouth first told me about it, and I really enjoyed it. And then I met John. I'm trying to think how I met John, maybe through Bob Servant or probably through Irvine at some point. But you know, I play golf with him now and a few others. And it's I find he's a really interesting writer. Kill Your Friends is obviously a novel, but definitely had biographical inspiration behind it. It felt very hefty as a result, and I enjoy a lot of his writing, John. But this book caught me in the hop, really. I was just so impressed by it and affected by it.
And it is devastating. But it's also, my God, devastatingly funny. right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's got everything. All life is here, and this idea of again these relationships and these brothers and the closeness of that. But I think you're right. It shows you how much a writer who you can get to know and feel who you know on the page can utterly blindside you.
Yes, totally. And it's always when it comes from a really personal place, I think. You know, and you're like, Christ, that is a book he's been working on, consciously or not, for decades. You know.
Absolutely.
I think even before the event, he was probably thinking this is going to be something that will have a dramatic impact on my life. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But it's you know, and it's narrative non-fiction. It's yes, it's non-fiction, but it's a story. You know, and it's handled so skillfully, and so powerfully told, and quite economically told. You know, I think he had a very clear vision of what leads to what leads to what, and I think it's about, you know, it's kind of haunting because he goes back to the childhood, but you know what's going to happen to his brother. You're almost watching a kid grow up, and you know how that life is going to end, and they don't. You know,
Yeah,
which is
that's
really
absolutely true. Yeah,
It's kind of you kind of feel that you're a kind of co-conspirator.
But you can't look away.
No, absolutely. And it had a huge effect on me.
Yeah, it's staggering. It is staggering. We were talking about the I think it's the follow-up directly, so The Fathers, which is a fictional book that he wrote afterwards. So Irvin was talking about Men in Love, which of course was revisiting the train spotting gang at a different point, actually 89, 90, so very much the same period that Legends is in. And John was talking about The Fathers, but even in The Fathers, it's about these two almost blood brothers. It's about these two very different, or are they, men who meet outside a hospital, and they live in a very different Glasgow that's 2 streets apart. And
I really enjoyed The Fathers. One thing I did say to John was I wasn't sure that the BBC Scotland TV writer that had a writing team of 12 and lived in a massive house in the West End. I mean, from my memory of Bob Selden,
quite.
I think in his fairness, he was thinking of the Taggart type level.
Yeah, and that's right.
Which is correct.
There's a sort of Taggart type writer, isn't it?
Exactly.
And it is wonderful. But even again, in episode 1 of Legends, there is you can say whether you want to say who the characters are, but there is literally this line, you know, you're my brother, bonded in blood, you know, you still have that idea. And of course, in Guilt as well, this idea of brothers and knowing someone and what way you could befall, you know, your fate, if you like, is something that seems to keep recurring as well.
Well, siblings, and this definitely ties into Oh Brother, and it definitely ties into Guilt, I think it's a really interesting dramatic relationship with siblings, because they can be very, very, very different people that would never normally spend any time together for just predictable societal reasons. They never move in the same circles. But they have this permanent, unshakable bond that they can't get rid of. And they have to deal with it one way or another, and it comes with enormous stress and pressure, and it can just be very, very difficult. And dramatically, what's interesting with the sibling relationship as well is you don't have to have that kitchen table conversation at the end of every day because it's not a spouse. You know,
that's very true.
They can operate with each other much more dynamically, and I think it's a great examination of the sibling relationship, the challenges and the love that it brings. And it's a very Scottish story. You know, I recognise that story. You know, when you're growing up, there's always people that have that challenging brother, challenging cousin. You know, that kind of, you know, these young Scottish guys that live life on the edge.
Completely, it is that.
And it's often, you know, they're often at heart just very good people, but they've taken that direction, and you know, the further they get into the commitment to living the life like that, the harder it is to get back. And you know, you're willing. You know, even though you know what's going to happen to Gary, John's brother, you're willing it not to happen, and you're willing him to make different decisions as the book goes on, and react differently to situations, and be the person he can clearly at heart is. It's a profoundly affecting book. I
agree, and I've read it at least twice. And as much as sometimes I start it and I go, I'm not going to go in here just now. It's so utterly full on in all the best ways. But I found myself, even on second reading, still perhaps hoping
hoping.
These words are on the page and they're static, but you think perhaps you still, and I wonder what that says about human nature, that we're still just ever hopeful, even in the face of the bare facts on the page,
yes,
that maybe something can change.
Maybe something can change, and it's so hard, and for, you can't imagine, well, you can imagine, thankfully, due to the brilliance of the book, but you can't imagine what those experiences are generally like for John and his family, and that thing of, think about suicide, I'm talking generally, not about this case, is that it's both, when you read about it, it's both completely avoidable and completely unavoidable. Yeah. That's the thing.
Yes.
Things could go differently on the day, but they're not going to go differently necessarily in the life. And that is that is probably the real challenge for people to deal with. And John talks about that. And he talks about guilt and last words not being what he'd hoped they'd be, and the fact there was no note.
Yeah.
I think he says it was like the last page had been ripped out of the book. It's incredibly eloquent. But like you say, I'm being very, very generalising here, but I think in the hands of a kind of more pious, probably American writer, this book would have been unrelentingly bleak, and think that they had to take on lots of other societal arguments to kind of flesh the thing out morally, all that stuff. John didn't do any of that. He said, this is our story, and he didn't hold back from the humour.
Yeah.
And that's
that's so true. And that's very Scottish as well, I think.
Very Scottish. A lot of time in Scottish, you'll go to a wake and people are laughing.
Absolutely. Totally.
And it is gallows humour, but also it's saying, no, this is a story of light and shade, because when you have light, you can appreciate the shade. And I think that's what's very important with it and makes it such a powerful book.
Yeah. And also that balance, again, or that uncertainty. Is it okay to laugh, or is it not? Or is this serious, or is it, that can be really powerful in and of itself. How do I respond to that? Yeah.
I also, there's a little aspect I've just remembered in the book of John, something happening in a room at the hospital, and him scurrying off to take notes in the toilet. And I thought that's exactly what I would have done. And, that again, the writer is a writer's book, if that makes sense. It's events seen through the eyes of a writer. It sounds very obvious, but I do think it's just that slightly different aspect, which is, it's really interesting. Just loads of these tiny details. He's got a great eye for detail, John. There's kind of reportage in there, and that I always think it was the Scarface poster that his brother had up in the house, and just so sad that that's what he's sort of. That's how he saw his life at a certain level, and then John was surrounded by the reality of it. It was quite jarring. Yeah,
and that detail is incredible. But you're right; those are almost the moments, aren't they? They're so visual. I would say that's a really key thing. They're like hugely visual. And again, I think that's something that very much we're seeing across your work, but certainly in Legends I Don't Want to Give. But the little details, the little period details are there. I think I've just seen you on that. There you go. There on the cover of that magazine. There. Let's briefly. We should wind up soon because you have got a premiere tonight. Let's touch on the cast finally. What did you have any of them kind of in mind? Steve Coogan, because we're talking about you don't know whether to laugh or not. I cannot, like the way in which he treads this line, and there is real humour in this, right? There's real dark humour from the off, but he's also deadly serious, and you wouldn't mess.
No, he's great.
He's perfect.
No,
he's perfect for that.
Just brilliant, and it was sort of, his name was sort of part of the conversation quite early on, and I couldn't quite let go of the idea of
really?
It. Yeah, just felt. Because I felt it was also very exciting. It's always exciting when you've got a great actor doing something they've not necessarily done before. I also think comedic actors can be fantastic actors. Yeah. Because they're capable of carrying those tones within them and playing the humour very lightly. Often, sometimes very dramatic actors, they oversell the humour. Yeah. Whereas rather than folding it into the performance. And I think the big thing with Steve, when I met him I said, look, lots of people have thoughts. My advice would be, you have your hair, your accent, no prosthetics, and don't meet any real people to impersonate. And just play it as a natural, instinctive performance, which is what he did. And as a result, I thought it was just, he's brilliant. And like you say, he treads that line with the humour fantastically. Tom Burke's an actor I've admired for a long time. And to get him on board as Guy, I thought was brilliant. He was really, really good. And there's a scene in Ep 3 of him and Dawn singing, which is just tour de force, I think. He's unbelievable.
Just the way in which he inhabits it, and it's clearly relishing this double life.
Yeah, exactly. And then Amelia Neen, Hayley, Jasmine, Dougie Hodge, and then Gerald Kidd is a revelation in this, as Malonis, and Johnny Harris.
I'm in love, by the way. I'll just tell you.
Oh yeah, Gerald. Oh Christ, he's a well put together.
That's me. God Almighty. Sorry.
Yeah, he's a well put together man. Part Scottish.
Really?
Part Scottish.
Oh, well, okay. He can definitely come on the podcast then.
Yeah,
Give me his number.
He'd love to.
But yeah, every detail, every part of the community, every character, and just that kind of wrong footing and right footing of people I find absolutely brilliant. And yeah, as always, Neil, with it just like a banging soundtrack.
Yeah,
Important.
Great. Oh yeah, great. And we spend a long time in the music, all of us involved, and we kind of got some cracking tracks in there. And when you find the right one, it elevates it. Great score as well.
Yeah.
So no, I'm very happy with it. I hope it lands.
It will land. It's going to be amazing. Just very, very briefly,
Yeah.
finally, are you always, because you were saying when we last spoke 3 years ago, amazingly, Legends was starting to kind of come to life. Are you always writing? Do you always have
Yeah.
kind of the next idea or few ideas on the horizon?
Well, I'm trying to be more monomaniacal and have one thing I was working on, which took me a long time to
monogamous
get. Yeah, more monogamous. And I'm just about managing that. But yeah, I'm writing something just now, and I'm always going to be writing something. I enjoy it. It kind of relaxes me. The only time I'm not writing is in the real thick of production. But the other time there'll always be something ticking along.
All right. Well, if you don't want to write right now, we could now go down to the tree with our cans because we've done our work.
That's my plan anyway, actually, before you mentioned it.
Do it anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Listen. Thank you so much. Let's not make it 3 years again. Till next time, please.
So, thanks for having me again.
Cheers. Thank you.
We have industrious Neil Forsyth chatting in Glasgow. No trees were climbed in the making of this podcast, I assure you, but never say never. Legends is streaming now on Netflix, and you can also watch Neil's excellent earlier series, And You Must, Guilt, The Gold and Bob's Servant on iPlayer. And just to recap, Neil chatted about his love of Deacon Blue's Raintown, Irvin Welsh and Danny Boyle's Trainspotting, and John Niven's Oh Brother. If you'd like to hear more love about Deacon Blue's Raintown, Monarch of the Glen star Don Steele waxed lyrical about it in an earlier episode of A Kick Up the Arts. And there's also an album special with the band's very own Ricky Ross and Lorraine McIntosh discussing their latest record, The Great Western Road, and all sorts of other Deacon Blue adventures as well. If you're up for more Trainspotting chat, there are episodes with author and poet Michael Peterson and comedian and actor Sanjeev Kohli, both singing the praises of the book and the film. And if you fancy hearing some more cultural conversations live, I'm hosting a celebration of the exceptional Glasgow writer Agnes Owens. That's this coming Saturday, May the 9th at Milngavie Town Hall. I'll be joined by writers Kirsten Innes, Danny Garavelli, Kirsty Logan, Heather Parry, Agnes's son John Crosby, and custodian and legend of the Agnes Owens and Alistair Gray archives, Saoirse Dallas. I'm also joining incredible Dundee musician She to reflect on her new album, that's at Asai in Dundee on May the 17th. And I'll also be in conversation with female and non-binary musical collective Henhouse, that's as part of their gig and film screening at Edinburgh Queen's Hall on May the 28th. And also, looking forward to the summer, loads of other events, including one with Nicholas Sturgeon at Erskine Arts, that's on the 2nd of August. I'll put the rest on my website. I will update my website. I would love to see you at one of these events, or all of them. Come along. For now though, thanks as ever for listening, for sharing, for getting in touch, for all of that. Tell your pals, like and subscribe, come to the live events, and thank you again. Bye for now.